Hello. Uh, I hope you can hear me. I'm Phil Campbell. I am delighted to be here and there, wherever there is. I, uh, I've been very interested in how the perception of uh, myself and everyone else as a human being has changed following the pandemic, and how it will continue to change. I hope you can see the slides okay. I have been teaching now for a few years, and I always start with what I want to talk about today, which is called the vortex, for want of a better word. I've had many careers. I'm that old. I'm an architect by profession. I'm a terrible poet. I've been a game designer for over 25 years. I started an AR, augmented reality company, probably 8 years too soon. That's 8 years PPG, I think, which is pre-Pokemon Go, which might have changed everything. I now teach. I'm a professor at Berkeley City College and Cogswell University of Silicon Valley. I'm going to talk about some design concepts in relation to the pandemic. I can really only look at them through the lens of being an architect or a game designer. I'm not a philosopher or a scientist or a politician, even any of those important jobs. So what I specifically am doing is looking at the human condition in relation to how we perceive ourselves within our environment, how we perceive others, and how that adapts and adjusts us, and then translating that to the world of design and game design and architecture. This is called the vortex. It's been something that's been with me for a long, long time. It's a concept of you, the human being, and your relationship to the world around you. Oh, by the way, I'm coming to you from sunny San Francisco, and I'm Irish, so I have a tendency to ramble. And so hopefully I'll get to the end of my slide deck this time. It's a tight timeline. The vortex makes an assumption that you're the nucleus of your own vortex. That sounds very self-involved, but in fact, you'll see that it's very much the opposite direction, where you're a nucleus that are really mixing with the world around you. And the notion is that at any given moment in time, you are perceived differently by other people, and you have a different perception of yourself. This sort of thinking started with me when I was leaving college, what about 100 years ago, and it stuck with me ever since. And I've experimented with it in life, in architecture, in games, but mostly relating it to games. So, you know, take that with a pinch of salt. It was all inspired by this. It's a book by an Irish writer whose pen name was Flann O'Brien. It's called The Third Policeman. Now, I know you're not supposed to read out your own slides, but I have the accent for this, so I feel that I can. How can I convey the perfection of my comfort on the bicycle, the completeness of my union with her, the sweet responses she gave me at every particle of her frame? I felt that I had known her for many years, and that she had known me, and that we understood each other utterly. There's a lot of incredibly meta, surreal concepts launched in this book, which is a very, very funny book. And one of the key concepts that stuck with me was the idea that we weren't necessarily defined. What constituted us as a human being was not the edge of our skin, was not where our body ends, as it were. That wasn't a hard surface, that our molecules were constantly mixing with the world around us. And the basic premise of this part of the book was that these Irishmen are cycling around the village constantly on their bicycles, and the molecules are mixing up so much that eventually the Irishmen become more bicycle, and the bicycles become more Irishmen because of that mix. So by the end, I don't want to give it all away, but but the Irishmen, you walk around the village and the Irishmen are all propped up against the wall because they're more like bicycles, and the bicycles are chasing the lovely woman of the village around trying to get dates. And so this stuck with me, the idea that if you were to consider yourself the nucleus of a vortex, what the perception of you as a human being was constantly changing based on what was around you at any given time, what you were seeing, smelling, tasting, who you were standing beside, what environment you were in. And in trying to translate this to games, to figure out by proxy how you were reacting with your first person avatar or your third person avatar, the notion was very simply stated that you considered yourself moving in a 3 foot radius of space. Now, you'll see later how this relationship has changed when we start to consider our 6 feet of separation. So everything you do at any given moment in time is influenced by your environment, by your proximities. And so in putting this into action in games, I'll start with this cheesy little sketch here led to this project. I've got to thank the Brazil Campuseros for inviting me, but just as an example, the notion that how could we influence that space around us? How could we make it clearer? Now, obviously, these theories have developed over time. AR is a really good example of us becoming having a more extended life. I teach design thinking as well, and the concept of the persona, empathy maps, all seek to draw your influences in around you to actually help shape you as a human being. So this was a very simple concept for Guyana in Pernambuco. It was a sort of social, cultural world, spiritual world, where every avatar in the game was a reflection of you, and you had a system called emblems. Now, emblems were a way of showing everything you'd achieved, everything you'd done in the game, everything you'd listened to, and they were a display. They opened up like a peacock, and it really was inspired by taking part in Caboclinho, I hope my pronunciation is correct, parades, and being there in Brazil for a time, listening to the sound of the maracatu drummers, and all the various spiritual aspects of that life. So basically trying to apply the notion that you're more than just your skin and bones. I actually, at the time, there was a big deal about Second Life. Everybody was using Second Life, the program. But I was really more concerned with your first life. And that's why I ultimately got into augmented reality. But really throughout my career, I've tried to apply the notion that you can extend your vortex. You can encompass different things in your vortex. Sometimes it's done in a very simple way. I know this looks like a video game, but it's actually architecture. This was a competition for a theme park. I designed a lot of theme parks. And the idea was, once we discovered that the client himself actually felt that he was Santa, the idea was to try and immerse him in our scheme, in our competition scheme, by creating this huge drawing that actually filled his desktop. So you can see there that that's the notion of his arm inhabiting the drawing and drawing him into the vortex of this drawing. You can see a rolled up example of our actual competition drawings. You can see Santa's comic collection, the keys to his Vespa. It worked because we won the competition, but it was the idea that somehow we'd inhabited his headspace and somehow we'd drawn ourselves into his vortex and what constituted him at any given moment in time. For a time, I was a senior designer at Legoland in Windsor, and the fools actually let me design a vortex for real and actually built it. And this really was the notion of how this vortex could be translated into this theme park. So you joined the vortex of the theme park. You can see that all the design, if you can see the slides clearly, was designed to draw you into the park and propel you through it. All the buildings were thrown off from the vortex. It also had a fun design decision where so this was a royal park at Windsor, and some of the trees were accidentally knocked down, and they asked me what could we put there, and I just off the top of my head I said, "Oh, a dinosaur," and of course they built it. They can build anything in Lego, so it's not often in life you get to make decisions like that. In relation to games, though, it's very interesting, because when you consider that your third-person avatar or your first person is a proxy for you in the game or for the character you're playing, how do you deal with the game space? How do you relate your player to the environment so that it becomes more meaningful, and so that ultimately you can make more meaningful actions and you can appear and behave more appropriately for that character, whether you're playing a character or yourself? How do you deal with something like that in one of our earliest projects, in like an Escher world where there's at least 4 dimensions? How does my avatar relate and see that world? So let me look at some examples of the things I worked on and some of the systems that had gone before. And I've kind of called it modular humanity, and figuring out how there may be a system for translating this vortex of space around you as a human being, translating that into games and seeing how that made your avatar or your first person self react. And systems of proportions obviously are not new. Vitruvian Man by Leonardo, supposedly the perfect human form, and of course the modular by Le Corbusier. Le Corbusier actually met with Einstein in 1946, and this is what Einstein had to say about the modular scale of proportions, which makes the bad difficult and the good easy. And so in an effort to look for something like this, where there's a true connection between you, your avatar, your persona, and the environment, to ultimately make your actions more appropriate, I looked at how well this had been done in Tomb Raider. So this is my own small contribution, part of my contribution to the Tomb Raider world. I worked on Tomb Raider for about 5 years, and this is a journey for Lara here that takes her from Scotland to the Channel Tunnel, very exciting, and to a French zoo. And it was loosely based on Joan of Arc and various other mythologies, Planet of the Apes. Originally, I designed this for Northern Ireland, but of course, the powers that be said that Northern Ireland was not glamorous enough, so it had to be Scotland. Of course, Game of Thrones would dispute that now. I think we're plenty glamorous enough. And Tomb Raider was key in the sense in the shaping of the modular, because it was about proportions, right? Probably not the proportions you're thinking about. And these are various versions of Lara through time. But what it was the relationship of the Lara avatar to her environment as built in the engine and the tools for the game. And now this looks like Minecraft now or something. This is from about 1998, 99. And it's a very simple system. And the big difference here was that instead of it being like a building system now, like Unreal or Unity, where everything is planes and shapes and you put those things together, this was like sculpting from the inside. It was like one of those executive toys where you put your hand on the nails and leave an impression. So you were sculpting Lara's world from the inside. But here was the thing. Every single movement of square, you can see that the module of that is squares. It later became triangles as it grew more sophisticated. And this was developed by the core design team in Derby in England. And you'll see that every time you move a square, Lara, it works in proportion, right? So Lara could always jump a certain amount. She could standing jump a certain distance. She could climb, she could jump up a certain distance, she could swim, shoot, etc. All of her movements were geared to the actual environment that was being built around her. And so the beauty of this was you couldn't make a mistake. As a designer of these levels, you couldn't fail in a way. You couldn't make a space that was impossible. There was no ambiguity about anything. You could see exactly if Lara could make a jump or a running jump or swallow dive or whatever it was. But more to this, and one of the things that I think made the game so so popular was the idea that the player couldn't fail either. It was very legible. It was always clear what was the appropriate thing to do generally. I mean, something like Uncharted nowadays is a very beautiful game, but much harder to read because it's so much more realistic and so much more just more advanced in technology. But they ended up, I think, having to paint white lines, you know, where you could jump, where you could do. But in this game, as you develop the game in this series of pushing out of squares, you knew that you could not make something that Lara would fail. So the player would never feel that sense of failure. I mean, you could miss a jump, but you had a great sense of empowerment as a character in this world. So I think that ultimately the proportion of Lara and the proportion of her figure and her moves in relation to the game meant she had a really strong connection to her environment. And this harken back to my views on the vortex, where we are at any given moment in time, how we are perceived as a human being and how we perceive ourselves as a human being is altered by the things that surround us. And so that ends up leading to appropriate behavior. For a few years, I was a creative director on James Bond at EA, and we're constantly figuring out what James Bond would do. Right? What was the appropriate behavior for James Bond? And we started designing things, you know, in big moments. James Bond dives over a building and rappels down because that's what he would do. Or he fights a bunch of tanks in the elevator. That's what Bond would do. Because at any given moment, if Bond couldn't open a locked door or tripped on a curb or slid off a roof, unless he wanted to, it broke the spell. It broke the illusion of being James Bond. And I developed Bond in both first and third person. So constantly you're thinking about what is the vortex around Bond, the avatar in the game? And consequently, how does that relate to the humanity that's driving it? And so every design and every aspect of these designs that I've tried to create are related to the appropriateness of the behavior, how they relate to their environment around them. What might that avatar be seeing? What might that avatar be smelling or understanding or witnessing? Who's in proximity to that avatar? How does that affect how the enemies and the antagonists relate to that character? What are they seeing? And sometimes the goal could be, this was one of the first open world games. We got some of things right. Omicron, the Nomad Soul. It was a great excuse to get David Bowie into a game. But sometimes your synergy with your world can be complete. You were tasked in this game with playing about 50 characters, I think, in total, inhabiting their souls. And in every juncture, as that character, you had to behave appropriately. You were a great fighter or a great singer, a great puzzle solver, good with robots. And however you related in that design as a character meant how you were in tune with your world. And this was a brand new world within your computer. I remember doing 3 different techniques here. I looked at it from the persona and person point of view, which is on the left, which is basically telling little vignettes, little stories of how the player reacted as he entered environments and as he encountered people and what he was seeing and hearing and experiencing. I also, being an architect, looked at it from the architectural and the environmental point of view. So often, and this may not be the perfect rule for level design, but I often created the environment first, the nature of a factory or a big business company like this particular one in the middle is Konsu, and figured out how that world would influence the player and what the player character would do within that world. And if all else failed, there's always the good old trick of designing a level based on a Frenchman's face. This is, for me, a classic hidden narrative where maybe I was mad with my boss, David Cage, at one point here, but I found that I could transmogrify his face and create a level. I did give him a cigar to complete the jewel heist in the vault because he didn't smoke, because that was necessary. But again, it was another way of translating that inner hidden story, that nature of how I'm linked into my environment and finding some way, some path to design so you never get stuck. I think considering it now, I think I have about 3 minutes. Obviously, my mantra had always been three feet. There's a 3 feet radius of space around you, and everything that's in that space at that given moment is what makes up you as the person. It's your relationship to your environment, to your family, to your people around you, the people you're talking to, hugging, whatever the nature of that relationship is. And then translating that to games and architecture and figuring out how that would be perceived in moving through a space in a design or as a character moving around an environment in a game. Now, 6 feet apart, the new normal, possibly during this pandemic, and possibly it's changing life forever. But again, it caused me to consider the difference with my nucleus, what I'm now considering. And it can be quite literal in my simple-minded way of thinking that 3 foot radius translates to 6 foot. And now my vortex encompasses all that imagined empty space where I am not relating, I am 6 feet apart from any other human being to be safe. And obviously, my first goal is to translate that into video games and figure out if this is the new normal, if this is the way, sorry, cat attack. If this is the way that people normally relate to the world, then obviously translating that into video games, it's going to be different. There's going to be a different perception of space and the way we deal with people around us, ultimately. Maybe not in the craziest, silliest of games, but really if we're getting more serious about, The Last of Us or something that has some kind of relationship to human feelings and emotions. My general feeling in closing about being the center of a nucleus, being the nucleus of a vortex that extends out 6 feet is it's just something we need to adjust to. It gives us a different perception of our environment and the people around us. It's not a cause to regress or get isolated or shy or separated because it's a very separating thing. I mean, these things, masks, this looks like somebody's underpants, but it's a mask. Masks are very separating things. You can't even see a smile. But I think my goal would be to project into that space safely. I know it's the antithesis of what some people are about, but be louder, be more colorful, be brighter, wear a top hat. I don't know. The idea is that you have this 6 feet of space to inhabit, project into it. I mean, obviously, if we all wore visors and those were proved to be medically safe, clear visors rather than masks, people could see our expressions better. It might even magnify our expressions. It's a perfect place for AR to inhabit. I think AR can be very important in this now in terms of communicating out and incorporating our environment back to us. I think so. Essentially, in short, I don't have any life-changing answers, but I think that we have to consider that with our 6 feet of space, our 6 feet of separation, we have to consider projecting. We have to consider widening our scope and actually trying to engage with the world in a different way, if that makes any sense. So yeah, if that's it. If there's any questions, always turn to your trusty whiteboard and your Pentel marker, your sign pen. Keep the world going. Design never stops. I think I'm on time. I can't see any other data here, so there's a delay. Okay. Actually, I could knock that off and just get the full me. I'm very grateful again to have been invited to do this. I think it's just worth considering that 6 feet rule. It's important, but you can fill that space. As for me personally, I relate that to my architecture and my video games. But thank you.